The Xbox Series S and X marked the start of a new generation for Microsoft game consoles and the culmination of 4 generations of Xbox. Where the last time Microsoft launched a new console generation, their marketing led them down the path of an all-in-one entertainment center that focused on TV as much as it did video games. This generation has since turned a new leaf, focusing on gaming and the consumers. The Xbox Series S is the cheaper of the two consoles, prioritizing higher frame rates at the lower resolution, while still allowing next-generation games to be played at an affordable price of $299. My initial reaction to opening the Xbox Series S was just pure astonishment at the size of this thing. Coming in at just slightly longer than my Nintendo Switch with a weight of 4.25 pounds, this is by far the smallest Xbox ever made, most likely contributed by the fact that this Xbox is all digital and thus lacking a disk drive. As for the I/O, the Series S features an HDMI 2.1 port, an Ethernet port, 2 USB 3.1 ports on the back, and a USB 3.1 port on the front of the console. At just a fraction of the more powerful Xbox Series X's size, the Xbox Series S brings in some shared next-generation features but at 60% of the price. Along with the console is the Xbox Series S and X controller, a slight variation of the recent Xbox One controller. The improved ergonomics, textured grips, and overall form factor feels tighter and more compact than the previous iterations. This new iteration also keeps the same port at the bottom of the controller, allowing you to use the same accessories from the last generation. Something that has changed is the new USB-C port at the top for charging and wired connections, though sadly these still come with AA batteries. Lastly, a new share button has been added that mimics the share feature of the PS4, allowing you to capture quick screenshots and gameplay clips. While the Xbox Series X will be targeting 4K resolution games running at 60 frames per second, the Xbox Series S will lower the resolution, targeting 1440p at 60 frames per second. Although yes, the Xbox Series S is capable of hitting up to native 4K, that's up to the discretion of the developers and most likely will be a feature you won't see unless you're playing a less intensive game. For the most part, Xbox Series S is targeting high frame rates while the Xbox Series X goes for the higher resolutions. For those with 4K TVs though, the Series S will upscale to 4K resolutions and still have support for up to 120 frames per second, should developers choose to use the feature. This all puts the Xbox Series S in an interesting position of being both weaker and stronger than the last generation Xbox One X. While the latter can run some Xbox One games at native 4K, the Xbox Series S will instead run the Xbox One S versions of those games targeting 1080p. Though it seems odd for a next-gen console to be outpaced in some aspects by its older counterpart, it makes sense when you account for the tech inside. The Xbox Series S features an 8-core custom Zen 2 CPU and a custom AMD GPU with 4 teraflops of power. For reference, the Xbox One X featured roughly 6 teraflops of power. The counterpoint on the Series S is that it features the more unique features exclusive to next-generation consoles. Auto HDR adds high dynamic range visuals to games that otherwise don't have it added in by the developers. Improved texture filtering provides lovely looking visuals at improved consistent frame rates, at least for Xbox One S standards. Old Xbox One games that run at unlocked frame rates can now run at a higher frame rate on the Series S, and those with the frame rate cap can run it more consistently. Of course, some developers may choose to go back and patch their games for the Xbox Series S specifically, though that is completely on a case-by-case basis. Because of Microsoft's new Smart Delivery feature, you can at least always count that the version of the game you download is the most optimized for the console you download it to. An added benefit of Microsoft supporting all 4 generations of Xbox. Perhaps the best example of this is Watchdog's Legion. Although on Xbox One X this runs at close to 4K 30 frames per second, on Xbox Series S it only runs at 1440p 30 frames per second, but with improved texture filtering, auto HDR, and ray tracing. Ray tracing is the big note here and something that's going to separate last generation and next generation despite the lower resolution. I'd say it's comparable to running a game on PC at 4K but on low settings compared to something running on ultra settings but at 1080p. Perhaps the most impressive upgrade with this new generation is the new SSD. With these new NVMe SSDs, the Xbox Series S and X are capable of loading games faster, both those optimized for the new console, and even those that haven't been patched for it. Loading games that famously took minutes now take seconds on these consoles. Even more surprising is the Quick Resume feature, the feature I'm personally most impressed with. With this option, players are able to load up a game but also switch to another game while maintaining the state of the previous game. I can go from playing Red Dead Redemption 2, one of the most intensive games of the last generation, and quickly boot up into the middle of Final Fantasy 15 without any hiccups. It's a marvelous feat and along with ray tracing, will most likely be the defining feature for this generation. However, what ultimately defines a game generation or platform for that matter are the games. This coming generation is interesting as there's a lot more crossover between last gen and next gen. For the most part, everything launching on Xbox Series S and X this year will also be playable on Xbox One. The main difference is the improved performance on next generation platforms. With that in mind, there's a lot less incentive to want to buy a new console for the exclusive games tied to only next gen, at least for this launch window. Microsoft's pro-consumer moves do point to them at least supporting cross-generation games for another year, though some of their upcoming games like Fable 4 and Hellblade 2 will only run on next-generation consoles and PC. For the time being, if you already have an updated PC or a capable Xbox One, then there's no real need to upgrade, at least not yet. However, if you're interested in those bonus performance upgrades such as higher fidelity visuals, improved frame rates, higher resolutions, and of course ray tracing and faster loading times, the next gen is a luxury or rather an investment in this case. Whereas Sony on the other hand isn't making pro-consumer moves like buying one game and having it forever, Microsoft is the complete opposite. Buying either a Series S or a Series X is an investment into the Xbox ecosystem, and that's going to be the most compelling feature for this platform. The games you bought on Xbox Original, Xbox 360, and Xbox One, so long as they're backwards compatible with Series S and X, will continue to work on your new console. The same can't be said for any of my PS1, PS2, or PS3 games on my PS5. Furthermore, these older games will take advantage of the newer hardware features like faster loading times and auto HDR. Xbox Game Pass is the gateway service Microsoft is touting this generation, with over 100 games being playable for the service. Additionally, EA Play will become part of the service at no additional cost at launch, so not only will you have access to all of Microsoft's games, the recently acquired Bethesda games, but you'll also have EA's now too. For only $15 a month, you get access to the service both on PC and Xbox, and are able to play with friends online. The cherry on top is the new Project X Cloud service included. With it, you're able to stream any of these Game Pass games to any Android 6 device or PC and iOS next year. So while Microsoft doesn't have an exclusive like Demon's Souls for PS5 at launch, what it does have is plenty of pro-consumer moves that make it a long-term viable platform, both this coming generation and all the generations that come after it. So you're not being pushed to buy this new platform because you can't play games without it, but buying into it does offer you a lot more value in the long run, and to some players that'll matter more than playing the newest exclusive tied to PS5. The Xbox Series S isn't without its faults though. The super fast 512 internal SSD only has about 364GB of usable storage, and even with these games running at 1440p, that's hardly enough space to hold up to maybe 5 to 9 large-scale games. While you can add more storage through external storage, it comes at a cost or with limits. The new SSD tech is expensive, with a 1TB capable Seagate SSD costing $220, almost as much as the Series S itself. You can opt in for a regular 3.1 USB hard drive at a cheaper price, though you can only play Xbox Original, 360, and Xbox One games off it, and at last generation speeds. Xbox Series S and X games can be stored there, but they can't be launched off it as they require the new SSD tech instead. At the lower entry point, this SSD technology currently is a double-edged sword for the platform, no doubt. Ultimately, the Xbox Series S is an affordable entry point into the next generation that doesn't force you to dish your collection of games you've accumulated on the Xbox platform. In many ways, this feels more like a hardware upgrade than a platform upgrade, similar to upgrading a gaming PC's internals as opposed to the jump from PS3 to PS4. Microsoft wants you to play your games any way you want, whether that's on PC, Xbox, or on your smartphone through xCloud, and so on. At the end of the day, Microsoft is offering you a return on investment with this console and platform, and whether that matters to you more than playing Spider-Man Miles Morales or Demon's Souls on PS5 will be the deciding factor for most gamers this generation.